and I will hand over to my esteemed colleague, Jennifer Stokes. Thanks for joining us, Jennifer.
Thank you, Stuart, and hello, everyone. When I proposed this topic, I didn't realise it would be quite as timely as it is, with over half of the population of Australia in lockdown at the moment. So I hope that you're all doing okay out there as best that you can in these challenging times. And much like Stuart, really thank you for setting aside the time today to prioritise making a really positive experience, or as positive an experience as teaching can be for students in the current context. I'd like to also acknowledge that this presentation is coming from Kaurna land, and pay respect to their elders past, present and emerging. One of the things that I'm going to do today is to use a tool called Padlet to have a bit of a chat and open up a discussion. And Stuart will post the link for that into the chat if you're happy to do that now, Stuart.
Yeah, I've posted that
You've
already.
Posted it? Fantastic. Yep. And then I'll just quickly show people this. This is a tool, and I'll take over screen sharing as well. This is a tool that I found is really useful for opening up dialogue. So one of the things I'm really interested in is what brings you here today, and what are some of the specific educational challenges that you're facing in the context that you're working in. I'm going to offer a bunch of solutions today, things that I've found have worked for me, and that's based on 20 years of teaching experience, particularly within digital spaces. So my background firstly was as a multimedia and film production lecturer, and then came over to enabling programs in the past decade. So in this space, you can feel free to add your thoughts. You'll find that there's a little plus icon that you can use, and that lets you just add things to the Padlet. So feel free to do that. And if you see something and someone's posted and you go, oh, actually, I've got a really functional solution that's working well for that, then please feel free to post. It's an open space, and we'll come back and have a bit more of a chat about some of the things that are emerging there. I've posted up one of the challenges for me that I'm really thinking about in this context, where there is so much happening and so much pulling our students away from their study context. And some of that, quite appropriately, really, really important and critical things. How do we make sure that education is still a loud voice within that space, that it is still compelling, and that they can keep their eye on their future goals, even while there's such challenging stuff occurring at the moment? So do feel free to jump in there and to post stuff into that Padlet space. Okay, and I'll get into my presentation now as well. Sorry, and just pop that over into slideshow mode. Okay. So I think people are aware of what the title is. I won't go over it again, just to highlight that it's about digital learning, enabling pedagogy and supporting the student engagement in these complex times. And I did win a 2018 AAUT for leadership in the space for enabling pedagogy. I've been teaching in enabling programs since 2009, and my PhD is particularly focused on enabling pedagogy and how we might support students from underrepresented backgrounds as they come into the university space to achieve well and succeed within that space. And unfortunately, one of the complications of COVID is that a lot of students are feeling similar to students from equity groups. So they're coming in to challenging environments. They're trying to work within spaces, particularly an online space, in ways that may be different and may make it a challenging culture. So there's ways and approaches we can use to work with that. So just thinking a bit about this educational moment that we're in, we like to think of university as being this really collaborative and connected space where people are learning together. But the reality for students over the past year and a half now is that it's much more like this kind of lonely journey where they're very much focused on a screen. They're working individually. They may not even actually get to be in the same physical space as their peers. So I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about the contextual challenges in this educational moment, and then we'll look at some of the solutions. So thinking about enabling strategies, looking at digital tools, and also a little bit about learning analytics, which is a space that I've been thinking about and working with more recently, and then some of the outcomes from what I've found from these approaches and a conclusion. So we'll move through all of that relatively quickly in the next sort of 40 minutes or so, and at the end there'll be some time for Q&A too. So one of the things in thinking about these issues last year as we moved rapidly into the online environment that I was thinking about is what has happened here, and partly the pandemic has created this huge shift to online and the need for educators to be ready to pivot rapidly between delivery modes, and for us to be able to do that in a way that maintains a sense of sort of calm and confidence and reassurance for the students, even though we may be going, okay, we need to do this really quickly. How do we do it effectively? These sorts of things. And there is this risk that additional technology can create further hurdles to learning, because first we have that issue of access. How are the students actually finding us? There's all these issues around things like digital poverty as well, and limited data, and do they actually have the technological tools they need to access as well? Then we need to actually engage them within that online space so that they can work well within it. And then we can finally get towards learning. So today we'll explore strategies to engage students and work to support effective learning in this context. We are in really challenging times at the moment, and unfortunately, particularly for the types of age groups that are generally studying university, we're seeing these really significant mental health impacts. So this was a story from 2 days ago on the ABC. We're seeing things like a rise of self-harm and use of mental health services since the pandemic began. That's in Australia. We're also seeing these sorts of stories being reported. This was earlier this year. College student depression doubled over pandemic. That's from an American context. So part of the issue I think we really need to be aware about here is, going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and some of people's basic foundations of how they expect to live in the world and how they expect to be safe and secure are being shaken at the moment. So we need to work with them to help them to feel secure so that then they can focus and think about that study as well. You've probably seen this meme. It's been around for a while and it's become particularly, I think, proliferating again over the past year and a bit. And this idea of people trying to go, this is fine, even though they're in really, really complex circumstances, and how they can work through it. However, we can work to negotiate the new normal. And I really like this follow-up meme, the hope for 2021, that this is fine, that we know that there's still risk there, but it's somewhat contained and we can focus on what we need to do, and maybe even find some of those home comforts as well with things like pets and coffee to help us get through things. And I think underpinning all of this, it's worth remembering that actually education is about hope. And a lot of what we're doing as educators is about supporting students towards reaching their future dreams. That idea that a degree promises a better future, we know that there's some complexities within it, but as one of my dear colleagues was saying to students at orientation this week, and it's funny, on Monday we actually were able to have face-to-face orientation, then we've been in hard lockdown, that a degree is something no one can ever take away from you. So once you've got that, that's something you can go, yes, I'm still able to head in that direction, in that trajectory, and work towards something I've dreamed of achieving. So keeping those kind of hopeful messages and those long-term goals in mind, I think is really helpful for students in this complex context. So if we think about this educational moment, I'm sure everyone has some really detailed stories to be able to share about what your 2020 and 2021 reality has been like. It certainly has been an incredibly challenging teaching experience at this time. I returned from maternity leave in March last year to my work at the University of South Australia, and was back at work for 3 weeks before everything went into online, at that point for the foreseeable future. We've then pivoted back and forth and we're back into the online space again. What I've been trying to do in this time is think through how can we look at this as a maturation of online and blended learning to make it a really, really effective space? And how can this pandemic work as a catalyst for change? How can we do better? And what are some of the silver linings? And I've been working to share that sort of information in different through things like the conversation, through online webinars, the things like some of you may have seen my Hertzer presentation last year. So the type of guiding principles that I've used and in reflecting on my teaching and what seems to be working, these have underpinned my teaching strategies with digital technologies during this time. So the first thing is just trying to take a moment and to have that focus on kindness, to recognize that we are working through challenging times at the moment and we're all trying to do our best that we can, and we're working through this together. Building on authentic connection first and then focusing on content, because with that idea that we do need to engage the students, we need to have a sense of where they're coming from before we can then work through the content effectively. Trying to keep a focus on respect and understanding. So looking at dialogic approaches, so rather than being in a sort of lecture space and lecture environment, how can we really open up dialogue through technology? Embedding enabling pedagogies, so those kind of really supporting strategies which are helping students transition, succeed and flourish within a university space, and strategic use of digital tools and learning analytics. So as I said at the start, I'm really interested in hearing what the challenges are that you're finding that you're facing at the moment. And also if you're finding some really useful solutions and you're happy to share them, because we are within a group of experts here. Everyone has been working through different challenges and different ideas. And so if you haven't already, if you can, please go to that Padlet and just post up one challenge, or if you see some comments there and you see something that you think would be helpful for other people, then please do pop something up there. I can see the great thing with Padlet is it is a live interactive tool. I can see that people are starting to post stuff on there, which is fantastic. And I'll come back to that in the Q&A as well at the end. I'll keep moving through my PowerPoint. There's also a QR code if you prefer QR codes. So one of the things that I think is a really important reminder, and I know a lot of you are probably working through some really useful strategies for teaching online, but I think when we're rapidly thrown into this space, the advice from Michael Sankey from Griffith University is really useful about avoid putting the technology cart before the pedagogy horse. So as educators, we have particular learning outcomes we're trying to achieve and goals we're trying to achieve with the students. So how do we use technology as the tool to achieve those goals? Don't get too caught up in the complexities of the technology. Keep that focus on the learning outcomes first, and then finding the right technology to achieve that second. So thinking about what are the learning outcomes you're striving to achieve within your teaching, and how do you reach these together with the students? So overall, just remembering technology is just a tool to achieve this. And in some ways, you may find that even just sort of using basic sort of conversational stuff through Zoom may be more effective than throwing in lots of extra technology if that distracts too much from what the actual learning outcomes you need to achieve. So that's the thing I'd say first, is remember technology is that tool. So this is the type of theoretical grounding. I won't spend very long on this, but that underpins the enabling strategies I'm using. So enabling pedagogy, and this was an idea that I established in 2014, and it's been picked up and expanded on and adapted through the sector. And really thinking about that idea of, as we have these new students connecting with the university, what might be the type of things that can support them effectively to develop their learner identities and succeed within this space, and also how do we value what they bring to the institution to help strengthen it and add to the knowledge base. Also positive psychology, really, really important that we're approaching things in this sort of strengths-based way, and that we can look at how do we have education as a positive kind of a focus. So as Seligman says, the goal of positive psychology and wellbeing theory is to measure and build human flourishing. So flourishing is kind of when you're living your best life, when you're feeling like you're really achieving things, you're really smashing it. So as Seligman points out, this can be achieved across 5 elements. So that sense of positive emotion, making it feel like a positive experience to connect with the content, to connect with the learning community at university. In creating a sense of engagement or flow so that people can be really have that deep learning outcome by being caught in that moment where they're achieving things, they're really deeply focused. Having positive relationships and thinking about how we can help to build those within our student groups online. A sense of meaning, which is usually connected to purpose as well, so that the activities that people are doing make sense. They can see how they work towards that broader learning outcome, which is then aligned with that longer term life outcome. And achievement, and particularly in the context that we're working in, one of the things that I talk with my students about is that at least you're not stuck. You know, a lot of people at the moment are facing huge challenges. They're sort of stuck in place, or even worse. Like, if you can keep working on your education, you know that you can keep moving forward at this time when a lot of people are held in place. And they say that's quite a motivating thing to be reminded of. Thinking about inclusive and constructivist design and valuing students' funds of knowledge. So what do students bring to the table? How can you help to connect with them around things that they know about in areas that they work within, and help to build that bridge to university knowledge and understanding? Using critical pedagogy using a dialogic approach. And I really like this quote, which says that a dialogic approach encourages educators to very carefully negotiate the student's gradual construction of knowledge, every step of which had to advance just 1 inch beyond the learner's level of awareness. Dialogue was the only means by which teachers could really attune their didactic interventions to the student's cognitive level, precisely because dialogue allowed the students to set the pace of their learning. So having those moments where you can really encourage dialogue, and using technology as a tool to be able to encourage dialogue at scale as well, to get a sense of what are the interests of your cohort, where are they coming from, how can you connect with them in that space and move forward as well. And using universal design for learning as a kind of background principle, and Stuart and I have actually written on this together. So UDL is a set of principles for curriculum development that give all individuals equal opportunities to learn. UDL provides a blueprint for creating instructional goals, methods, materials and assessments that work for everyone, not a single one-size-fits-all solution, but rather flexible approaches that can be customised and adjusted for individual needs. So these are the things that I've found are really useful approaches for underpinning these engaging teaching. Trying to keep that focus on what the learner does, working to encourage a state of flow. So how can we design assessments that are meaningful and have those type of deep learning outcomes, to keep that as that louder voice for students, that they get motivated about it, that they feel that there's a sense of purpose and that they would actually kind of keep doing this regardless of if it was being assessed or not. So working to foster these deep learning outcomes through innovative practice and effective application of appropriate technologies. And the things that I'm doing with my teaching are very much aligned with 21st century learning outcomes. So how can we think about problem solving using research? How can we think about encouraging critical and creative thinking? How do we work through things like building in group work, even within online learning environments? Okay, so let's get into some of the practical strategies with that as the background. So using these enabling strategies works to actively build online learning engagement. So some of the key messages here: think about designing for access and inclusivity. So there's principles I'll talk about in that in a moment. And knowing your students. So who is it that's actually in your tutorial group? And the only way we can really do that is through dialogue. So that's really key to knowing them. Having real focus on connection. So it's very unusual for me actually in this format to be talking for so long. I would much more usually be breaking people into groups, popping in and out of breakout rooms, these sorts of things, and then connecting with people to get a sense of where people were at and their thoughts and ideas. So you're working to build a community of learners. One of the very important things is providing them with opportunities to show their learning every session, because if you don't see those kind of outcomes, if you don't have them discuss things live in the Zoom, if you don't have them post things on the discussion board or in a Padlet or respond to things like online quizzes, how do you know what's actually sticking and where things are at? And follow up if they disappear. So some of the things that might be happening at the moment may be pulling them away, but they still want to be engaged. So sometimes if you can do something like maybe reach out via email, via your LMS messaging function, and see how the students are going and what's happening, then sometimes they'll say, I really want to be there. Is there any way I can catch up? That sort of thing, and you can reconnect them. And a couple of the bigger picture questions: can you make learning fun? Because if you can, fantastic, that will really help. And can you turn this challenge into an opportunity for creativity? And particularly last year with my digital literacy students, we tried to think about things like how could they create digital products that might speak to some of the emergent needs during the pandemic. So then thinking some of the actual practical issues, if we think about the initial issues within digital systems, firstly, just very basically, how do your students actually find you? Because you might have set up all the greatest stuff in the world, but unless they can actually find you, then they're sort of here being frustrated when you want them to be here in this immersive space. So making it as easy as possible, using multiple systems to do that as well is really important. And looking at things like your site design from the perspective of a student, if they're entering into that space, is it really easy and clear to find what they need to be doing each week? Have you made it really clear for them how to access the Zoom, for example, as their sort of continual links that they can find things? And do you do like a little email in the first couple of weeks to check that they know how to find those links and can connect? So making it as easy as possible for them to get there. And remembering that it's a live production environment that you're working within. So I think for me, having a bit of a background in digital media content creation helped, and I've actually spent a lot of time doing volunteer radio work. So I feel it's a bit sometimes like doing a radio show, that you always need to have a backup, that you need to be prepared with what are you going to do, if the internet drops out or if people aren't particularly chatty, having different options of things to work through and tailoring them to the class. So it is a live production environment. So take a little bit of time to think about the quality of your production. I like this little meme in the top right here. Virtual meetings are basically modern seances, because sometimes it does feel a bit like that. Elizabeth, are you there? Make a sound if you can hear us. Is anyone else with you? We can't see you. Can you hear us? As much as there may be some technological issues, I think also remember that even when we're teaching on campus, things always go wrong. There's always hiccups. So the important thing is that we weather through them and we keep moving ahead, and that, we maintain kind of confidence and positivity in the systems. Also just thinking about things like, can they, see your face clearly? Can they hear you clearly? People will put up with a poor image more than they will with poor sound. So very important there. It's important to work to build trust, and there are different schools of thought on this, but I think that it's up to the students as to whether they want to turn on their cameras or not. They may have various reasons that they don't want to, perhaps to do with issues of privacy, perhaps to do with issues of the amount of data that they have available. So if they're not comfortable with turning on cameras, I just ask at least that they have their proper name as a screen name rather than like a name we can't recognize, and also that they put up a profile picture. And I try to talk through things like the importance of visual connection and how I would be able to recognize them better in other contexts if I can see who they are. And I find that is helpful, but I certainly don't say you have to have your camera on. It's up to them. I'm being paid to have my camera on, and to have people in my house, they're not. So having a plan B as well is very important, and being prepared, particularly if the internet drops out, to tether to your mobile phone, to be calm, to encourage everyone, to say at the start of the class, if there are any issues, if you drop out, just jump back in, it's not a problem, just maintaining that sort of approach. And some of the questions you might think about as well, how do we effectively do discursive teaching online? Because it's easier to do a more didactic model, and unfortunately what I'm doing in this presentation, but there will be more Q&A, and we've got the Padlet, but where you're speaking at them rather than creating that really strong conversational environment. And certainly learning to break into conversational groups and using breakout rooms effectively and conducting effective synchronous teaching online has been a big learning curve for me over the past year and a bit. But it's when you do that stuff that you find that really strong learning happens. And what I find as well is when I pop in and out of the different breakout rooms, often the students will turn their cameras on when they're in a little group with 3 or 4 other students, and they're people that they've started to build that trusting relationship with, whereas they might be less comfortable doing that, say, with 25 people. So we've seen this real rise of synchronous online teaching, which I think has got huge benefits and is a mode that's not going to disappear. It allows for things like, say, in some of my classes, teaching students who are throughout regional South Australia in the same Zoom room as students who are from the CBD, and something that wouldn't physically be possible due to space. They want to have that live teaching experience, and the synchronous online teaching has opened that up. And it might be, say, things like where there's one student in Mount Gambier who wants to do the course, or one student in Ceduna, but they're still able to do that live connection. So once you've got them into that space, and then how do you establish a welcoming and inclusive environment? Well, one of the things is communicating key information through varied channels. So again, just making it easy for students to find you, making things seem friendly, positive, manageable. So every week I'll do a weekly welcome. Video is particularly important for contemporary students. They're enmeshed in things like YouTube and Netflix, and this kind of idea that video is the new authenticity. So it helps them feel that they can know you a bit better when they can hear from you, and it helps with cut through in a space that's such a saturated media environment. So do consider, even if they're just like little 30-second welcomes, that sort of thing really helps bring the students in and connect them. And then making it really easy for them to know what they need to do each week as well. So having that laid out clearly, having key things linked really helps. Thinking about accessible content and thinking about what might be some of the issues, say, for students who are using things like screen readers, or students who may have a hearing impairment, or students that have low data rates and that sort of thing. So having alternatives helps all sorts of different groups of students. So in that, this relates to the multiple modes of representation that CAST talk about as being important within universal design for learning. So having things there in their multiple modes, students can then choose the one that works best for them. So it aligns with their different learning needs. W3C compliance is also a really helpful, I guess, kind of gold standard to look at for accessibility. And so if it's an area that you're new to, just checking that out. It's the World Wide Web Consortium, and they provide these really useful guidelines. So things like having captions for videos and alt text for images, all those sorts of things that help people with different learning needs. Thinking about ease of navigation as well. So last year with colleagues at UniSA College, we undertook a course site review, because as soon as we flipped into the online space, we recognised that there were some challenges there, that if we could look at more ease of navigation for students, that would help, given this is then at the key point students are connecting with. And so we did things like construct ebooks to structure asynchronous lessons, and to make it as easy as possible for students to navigate through the sites and get to the content that they needed. And as we've moved into a new Moodle at UniSA this year, that's rolled over and things have worked effectively there too. When you're actually in the Zoom tutorial, really important, just like you would in any other kind of university environment, to set the expectations and norms at the start, so people have an understanding of what they need to do, what's expected of them, and it helps just kind of set that tone and make things work well. What I like to do at UniSA, we start at 10 past the hour. Usually that's so people can move between different classes. In this context, might be moving between different Zoom rooms. I open the class early, so I always open it on that hour. And I use that 10 minutes in different ways, just as a kind of welcoming time. So students know they can connect any time from that hour. Usually I might do stuff like play some music that's aligned with the theme for the week, maybe an engaging clip, something relevant and new that's come out that isn't necessarily needing to be in the tutorial, but is there to help provide a bit of fun context, or just time for a casual chat. So I always let them know, I'm here in the background setting stuff up. If you've got any questions, send them through in the chat. Really happy to answer them. And it just gives them that bit of extra space and time for contact. And then once it's 10 past the hour, I always welcome them, and I take the role and I greet each student. So even though I could easily look at the participants list and just check it off from there, in terms of making it that more personalized and welcoming space, just taking those couple of minutes at the start to go around, take their names, ask how they are, and have them respond is really important. Giving time for them to reply is important too. And it also helps you identify, are they going to be using their microphone or are they going to be using the chat box to communicate? And that can help with things like putting people in breakout rooms. And supporting students to learn in the way that best fits their technology, access, and learning style. So that's that aspect of inclusivity. Then once you've got that established, it provides more of an opportunity to value the diverse strengths and knowledges that the students bring with them. These are all individuals, they've all got backgrounds and histories, and they've all got different knowledge bases that they're bringing to the class, which can help strengthen things and be a real asset. So I use an inclusive and constructivist design, and I work to value students' funds of knowledge, which Gonzalez, Moll, and Amanti talk about. And it's so maybe it's things like different cultural knowledge, maybe it's different linguistic capability, maybe it's even, you know, they've spent ages playing video games, so they bring in expertise around gaming culture. As you have a sense about who your students are, then it helps you to be able to leverage that more and invite them into conversation in different ways. It also works to build the trust. And so it's building trust through dialogue. So I love this quote from Shaw and Freire, which is around how educators may adopt the dialogic method. Sorry, I just need a sip of tea. To better understand, hopefully that's working, guess my mute message is gone, to better understand their students' lived experiences and thus inform situated teaching. So Shaw and Freire say, epistemologically, it is possible by listening to students speak about their understanding of their world to go with them toward the direction of a critical scientific understanding of their world. And I think that's really, really important. And it helps connect the university knowledge with that sort of broader knowledge as well. You can use online tools to build cohort identity in these ways and work to foster a community of learners. So things like Padlet and other tools, I'll show some more of those tools in a minute, help you both synchronously and asynchronously to build this perspective that actually they're part of a much larger group, which when they're in a Zoom tutorial and maybe they're only seeing sort of 20 or 25 other students, they might not understand that they're actually part of a course where there's a couple of hundred other students. So seeing something like a Padlet fill up with ideas or different votes for different topics come through, or these sorts of things, helps give them a sense they're part of a really significant learning community. In digital literacy, in week 2, I get students to share their uni hacks. So what's their advice for other students so they can work as a learning community to share ideas around, okay, you're all starting university together, what's some really useful learning? And I also learn stuff from that as well, because it's from that student perspective. So it gives them that perspective, though, that they're part of a larger group. Provide ways to catch up on content missed and regular opportunities for students to speak with you and be really consistent about that. So things like online consultation and expectations around email response too. And be ready to shift formats if issues arise, for example, from Zoom to a phone call. I know it sounds really basic, but if you're having issues with the technology for whatever reason, with the student's computer, that sort of thing, there's nothing wrong with just actually having a phone conversation. Or things like being prepared to tether to your mobile with the internet if there's any issues there. I've worked to build engagement through interactivity and positive outcomes. And this quote from Vincent Tinto, I think, is great around aiming high. So high expectations are a condition for student success, and low expectations are a harbinger of failure. Simply put, no one rises to low expectations. And there's quite a bit of research about how the educator's expectations of what the students are capable of shape the student outcomes. So if we aim high, in my experience, you're really pleasantly surprised by how students just even smash through that and really, really excel and create wonderful things. So then designing assessments to encourage deep learning outcomes. So thinking about how can you embed elements of choice. So then students can look at what things might speak to them. It might be different modes of delivery. It might be around different topic bases, these sorts of things. And select examples which resonate and fun activities where possible. So this is an example for a week where we look at creativity and particularly idea generation. So giving students time to break into discussion groups and do live brainstorming, even though they're all working independently, online, and then driving that through the Zoom to go, okay, the next 3 minutes, you're all brainstorming in this space. We want to see what you come up with, making it fun, making it engaging. And including group work in each session with a clear and public learning outcome. And you can do this in the online space in the same way that you can do it in the face-to-face environment, particularly within synchronous classes. So using those breakout rooms effectively. I usually have students post stuff to a forum and then come back to the main group and discuss what they've posted. So you've got that sort of double public expression. I do also lock down the forums though to the people within the tutorial group in terms of visibility, so they can feel that it is that safe space if they're sharing things that are sort of a draft, they're fledgling ideas, but getting them used to that idea and that accountability. And providing opportunities for students to make small talk before class starts and individual opportunities to discuss assignment and coursework. And this one I think is really important, being brave and modelling working with digital tools. So just giving things a go and taking the students on that journey with you and asking them after you've tried these things, do you think that worked? How can we make it work better? And because they have a vested interest in these things succeeding too. They can see that you're trying, they can see that you want things to work well and you want to connect with them. They'll give you really honest feedback and usually really helpful feedback. And working to encourage PERMA, so thinking about those aspects of flourishing and how those can be encouraged through purposeful active learning. This is an example, sorry, I'm just keep talking very quickly to get through my last few slides, of how I had to take a concept of idea generation and work through how to do this in an online group work environment. So sometimes we're just trying to hack things and go, how could this actually work in this new space? So this actually comes from app development, and it's a way in which people go from having diverse ideas to then being able to share ideas to then come to a kind of unified understanding and outcome. And I worked out how to do this in my future ideas course, set it up so students were working in groups, gave them a warm-up exercise, which was draw a piece of toast, and then the students were all uploading their different pieces of toast. Then they had the individual divergent spaces to do an individual sketch or mind map on what they thought about their research topic, which they had in groups here. Then they met in teams. So they had team feedback on their individual drawings, and then they updated their own drawings or mind maps, and then they converged and then work together to do group mind maps or group drawings. The idea with this is taking individual students with different ideas and getting them to work together to be unified in their thoughts about a topic. So they're needing to do group work within this course. They needed to have a sense of what the others thought about the topic before they worked into researching it as a group. So this is an example of how we used online tools to do group work. And then some of the outcomes that they reached after their group presentations, we did group presentations via Zoom. This was last year. And then they also go on to an individual project, and they created really impressive things that spoke to issues they were interested in. So in that course, it's thinking about emerging kind of questions, and it's an information literacy course using research to support them. So you can see these are some infographics that students created at the end of that course: issues and risks involved with human enhancements, body image and Instagram, a guide for young women, and then Beware. This one was particularly around introduced bees and the impact that was having. So very diverse topics, but all research informed and creating engaging and diverse outputs. I'll try and get through things fairly quickly in the next 5 minutes to allow time for Q&A. So I'm just thinking about strategic use of digital tools to address educational challenges. Some of the questions I think that it's useful to ask are, what is your value add? So why should they learn from you and not from YouTube? Or given we're now in a global context, not any other higher education institution, what are you bringing to this, and how are you working to create this community of learners that's going to be really valuable for them? Can it be fun? And would you like to learn in this way? And some of the things we can work through and think about: issues of isolation and synchronous teaching, how we can use Zoom effectively to address that. thinking about group work online, how you can use breakout rooms well to address them. And considering live interactions. So for cohort identity building, I've been doing occasional live lectures. So some of my stuff is pre-recorded, but 4 times last semester, I also did live lectures close to when the assignment due dates were. And these were recorded, so they were optional, but it meant that students again could have that sense of cohort identity, using things like Padlet to create cohort identity and thinking about creative idea generation, brainstorming and innovation. Some of the tips and tools, being really clear with what students are being assessed on. So I use really detailed rubrics where they can see what the criteria is and then how they get an HD. So you can see that's a Word document version, and this has moved into our Moodle environment. Having clear weekly guides that then help them step by step to get through things. So this is again a sort of weekly welcome. In this one, it was on web and information literacy, so I've made it look like I'm in the Matrix, just a bit of fun. And then taking them through each of the steps. So how can you make it really clear what they're doing? Thinking about using some of these online tools, and sort of Padlet, live mind mapping, or gamification tools, things like Kahoot as well, because you can use these things synchronously at distance. And again, it gives them that sense of being part of a broader community. And it's rewarding and it's a public learning outcome. So just a quick reflection, thinking about who are your students, how do they know you? So it might be, I've got here sort of a professional photo, but then I also like to do things like I'm a crazy cat person. So my cats are something that, you know, a bit of identity marker for me. So how do they get those sense of the different layers of your personality, and how do you know them? So one of the things we can use here is learning analytics. It helps to provide useful tools to better know your students and personalised learning. And this is something that I've been spending more time on recently, because we get this sense the key goal of learning analytics is to improve student learning. There are heaps of opportunities for it, but the important thing is to connect these tools to existing pedagogies, and then you get some really, really useful outcomes. So some of the strategic use of learning analytics, I'm happy to talk about more of these at length, but for things like monitoring engagement at a basic level through your learning management system. At UniSA, we've had the ability to communicate at scale and send out personalised messages using a tool called On Task. So you might do things like send different messages to students who are in the P1 bracket for the past assignment compared to those in the C or D bracket. Working to engage with student interests. So I've documented sort of student interests and used them to shape research topics in the Future Ideas course, and embedding interactivity. And at UniSA College, we've been using Learning Catalytics, which is a Pearson product. And this can be done in synchronous and asynchronous ways, whether it's through teams leading to an online presentation, modeling the sort of strength of teams, other things like that. So all of these tools can be used both in a class environment or online synchronously or asynchronously. So very quickly, the outcomes that I've seen have been really strong student engagement and well above average retention and success rates in my course for enabling students, and positive student evaluations. And it's really linked to these type of meaningful ideas. So this was from last year, Australian UniSA News, about the pandemic prompting students to solve challenges creatively and how they use these opportunities to try and create meaningful works. Really very positive student evaluations. So last year, in what was probably my most challenging teaching semester, coming back from maternity leave part-time to then go into COVID pandemic, flip to online, I got the highest teaching scores I've ever had. So from -100 to +100, I got +92. So it was just like, okay, something must be working here. And I think it's about that connection with the students. I won't go through all of this due to time. I'll just jump over to my conclusion. So as in summary, I know there's a lot of information and I hope that it's been a helpful reflection for everyone. Teaching has been changed irrevocably. So this has been one of these hugely disruptive moments, both in a global scale for so many people's lives, but also for educational practice. But if we ground practices in enabling approaches, dialogue, and building strong communities, this will support student learning and engagement during these challenging times. And we can do this particularly through strategic implementation of digital tools and learning analytics. And this will maintain high quality learning outcomes because we get a real sense of who our students are and how to guide them and maintain them on that path toward their dreams. So through maintaining these hopeful approaches, we can give students and ourselves the best opportunity to flourish in this state of flux. And there are my references. And just before we flip over to Q&A, if you do have any online learning research to share, I'm a guest editor for a special edition of the UK Journal of Widening Participation and Lifelong Learning. I'd really love to see a lot of submissions from people, particularly from Australia. So that is the presentation element. So Stuart, I haven't been keeping on top of the chat because I've been chatting very quickly.
No, it's very difficult to keep on top of the chat and present at the same time as everybody's discovered. So thanks very much, Jennifer. That was fantastic. It's some really interesting and useful information there for us all. It's difficult to know where to start. I think I'll start with a couple of questions that were posted in the chat. And then if anyone else has questions, please feel free to post them now. So if you don't mind, I'll read them out so we can all hear them. Claire Biscom asks, how many students do you have in your class to be able to greet them all individually? I think she was a bit taken aback by your ability to greet your students.
Oh, okay. It usually in the tutorials would be about 25 students. And so what I'll often do is I'll set up the breakout rooms as students are coming into the class. And so then that way I've got you can either randomly put them into rooms. This is using Zoom as a technology. And so then you can go, okay, I just have 5 students in each room randomly. Or once you've established groups, then you can, pretty quickly, okay, I'll just put these students together into their group, and then you can keep reopening that breakout room throughout the session and putting them back into the same group as well. I guess the thing is planning ahead of time so you have a sense, as I said, it reminds me a bit of like live radio production. So you kind of almost a move ahead of thinking about, okay, this is what I need to be doing with that technology. So if you have a moment, say if you've got, often we might have like a short YouTube clip or something that you'd be playing, maybe that's giving a little bit of context for an exercise you're going into, and you go, okay, I've got just a spare moment there. That's when I'll put them into the breakout groups while that's playing, or that sort of stuff. I don't usually do it in lectures. It would just be within tutorials that I would do that.
Thanks. David Tonkin asks, what sorts of strategies do you use to accommodate students with low bandwidth?
That's a very good question. So there's a few different approaches. One would be not encourage them to need to use video, so that it's just fine if they're just using audio. Second would be, is there any way we can connect them to more data? So up until this lockdown, the UniSA libraries have always been open. So that's been something where I've been able to say, would you be able to maybe go onto campus? And a bunch of students were still, like last year, while other stuff was locked down, was still going onto the UniSA campuses to be able to connect. One of my lovely colleagues will actually look up hotspots in the students' area. She'll ask them what sort of postcode they're in, and then look up different hotspots and say, hey, did you know that there's a hotspot here that you can use to connect with more data? I know
that's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, it is.
So they'd be in their cars.
Yeah, and I've seen students, I mean, this is part of the reality for students. I've seen when students have turned on their camera, that they're working in cars and that sort of stuff. So,
yeah, I've seen our international students park their cars outside the uni buildings during the holidays. So
yeah. And I guess at least part of the hard thing at the moment is people might not feel safe going into the space, but they'll feel safe parking their car outside, and then they can use their data, stay warm. I did have one other thing. And the other is I always have a backup as a text option. So if they do drop out, because usually what I'll do is I'll also at the start of the class have a post on the discussion board that takes people through with links to activities. So I'm showing stuff through a PowerPoint. We're doing various, there's a lot of different technological wheels that are turning, but that way if they do drop out, they can at least still work through, you know, the gist of the activities. They can still make a post to the discussion board without using as much data. So yeah, and I will count that as showing that they're doing the participation for the week. So part of it as well is just knowing where the students are at and what's happening, that they haven't just left the class because they hate you, which you know isn't
it's
not
the
what's
first
going
conclusion
on.
you jump to, but it's not the usually
They're bored, they've gone. No, there's usually a lot of other stuff going on.
Thanks. Quinn Tran asks, dear Jenny, what are your suggestions regarding the balance as to make things as easy as possible for thinking, learning, understanding without spoon feeding?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I tend to go, how can we make it intellectually interesting for them? You know, so yeah, I would hate to think of anything that I do as spoon feeding, because I'm never sort of going, here's this, just learn it and just recite it back to me and that sort of stuff. It's more, how do we find what might be something that's engaging for them? So that's why the dialogue is so important, to get a sense of where a student's going and what's interesting for them, and then how might that sit within the context of the course. So for example, my Future Ideas course was very much a standard sort of introductory information literacy course. You know, how do you find good quality research to be able to inform your academic report writing and this sort of stuff. And I've really expanded that now. So it's like about creative problem solving. It's about trying to identify wicked problems and bring university kind of level research and reliable outside information to start to create some of the answers to these sorts of things. So some of the stuff students will write about are things like space tourism, or you saw some of those examples before, those issues of sort of social media and its impact on people's perception of their bodies and those sorts of identity things, which are really huge issues that people are grappling with. So they're relevant for students, but connect them to sort of high level, maybe this is cutting edge stuff and what is the research saying? Yeah. It's different for different disciplines though.
Thanks. There was a question and my thing just scrolled up unhelpfully. Sarah Forrest has asked, how do you use a program like Padlet in breakout rooms? There's been a couple of responses to this, but if you could tell us how you would do that, Jenny.
Yeah, what I would do is I would set up Padlets for each of the groups beforehand, assuming that they're going to be answering different stuff in their different breakout rooms. So say with that, a lot of this is about planning before you're in the live environment, the Zoom room. So say if I had 5 groups that I was planning on working with, I might have 5 Padlets set up. I then have the links there in the discussion board so that I can go, okay, everyone, as you go into your breakout rooms, you can see that those links are there on the discussion board. So this breakout room, you'll be using link 1, you'll be using link 2, blah, 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 blah. And then I can see live what they're doing on the Padlets. I can go into I always go into each of the breakout rooms as well. So I get them started on the activity. I let them know how long that they have. And then I spend the time sort of popping into each of the rooms to check that it's making sense, that they're ticking along okay, all of that sort of stuff. So I guess it's just about planning ahead of time and being really clear about what the activity is that you want the students to do and the outcome you want them to achieve. The other example I showed there around the Innovation Week in Future Ideas, that one, it's just one large Padlet for the class. And then I've got specific activities that I'm getting them into breakout rooms. They're doing some individual stuff, then they're doing some group stuff in breakout rooms. So just being really clear about the structure and having the Padlet prepared or multiple Padlets prepared ahead of time so you can just direct them to the links.
Right, there was a question on there about whether Padlet's easy to use, and I've used it for years, and I have to say it's, of all the tools, it's super easy to use.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about buying a subscription. You can use it for free.
Yeah, you can use it for free. And to be honest, I just tend to use the free version. I think you get like 8 Padlets, so it's a bit annoying. I clear them off.
You just clear them. Is it limited to 8 these days? Okay.
I think so. So
Okay.
I think it's also one of those things that we're seeing the monetization of previously free things. So you used to be able to make more. Now it's kind of locked down a bit to encourage you to get a subscription.
We've had that experience with SurveyMonkey.
Yes.
Okay. I think we've come to the end of the session. I hope I've got to your question if you have one. If you have any more questions, I'm sure Jenny's happy to hear them. Someone has asked, can we post the call for papers for your journal? So what I'll do is for everybody, I'll send out the link to the recording a bit later today for this session. And in that email, I will include the call for papers for the journal that Jenny's editing. So you'll get all the details there along with the recording of this session. So I'd just like to say thank you so much to Jennifer. That was fascinating, timely, interesting, and really interesting to hear about how it's really born out of your experiences from teaching. You've got a lot of experience and you've figured out what works and what doesn't work. So I think that's really valuable for the community out there. So I'd like to thank you very much on behalf of UniSA and the Teaching Innovation Unit, and keep up the good work. Fantastic. I hope everybody has a great day out there today. And if you're homeschooling, it's time to start class.
Yeah.
Everybody else, everyone. Enjoy. Thanks very much, Jennifer. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye. Oh, if you could give me back hosting rights, Jenny, that'd be great. Now I can stop the recording.